Here we are in the Force.com application that we've been working on, the candidate management application. We're going to go ahead and build some code. So we should already be in our setup screen, accessible here on setup by clicking on your name. And here under develop is where we start creating classes. You'll see Apex classes here. And all we have is the controller we built so far in Visualforce. So in this case, we can click new, and we'll see multiple places you can do this. We'll start by doing it here, and we can define a brand new class. So we're going to create two. First, we're going to create an enumeration that we want to use later. And then we'll build another class that defines what a big donor is for our application. And we'll create a third class after that. So let's start off by just creating an enumeration. Here I've created a public enumeration called donor type, and I've given it two possible values, an individual donor or an organization donor. And I can click save, and it'll save it if it's valid. Now if I had done something invalid there, if I edit this, and I do some bad syntax and even do a quick save, it'll go ahead and tell me there was a compilation error. It's expecting a bracket, and instead I gave it a parenthesis. So we can quick save again, and it'll go ahead and let me know everything's fine. So we have an enumeration class. Let's create a class that uses that now. So I create a brand new class from here. And this one will be called public class new donor, or big donor rather. And so this is defining a class, again enclosed within the brackets here, making sure that this is what's defining it as public. And this IDE is pretty useful. It's not obviously super full featured here, but I can search for things and jump to lines and redo and undo and things like that. So I can add comments. And then let's say we want to add a constructor to this that will fire whenever the class is instantiated. Here I've defined a constructor with the same name as my class. And this constructor takes in a string, and we'll call that variable inName. And I'm setting whatever you're giving me to a yet undefined internal variable called name. And so whenever I create a new big donor, I'm going to provide a name in for that donor and add that to a member variable in the class. Now let's actually define the variables and accessors here. So let's go ahead and create the name variable we want to use here. The name, in this case, we'll just make it an accessor. So the syntax here for the accessor is I've got a property called name. When someone gets it, I'm just going to return the value of name. When someone sets it, I'm going to set the value of name to whatever value they've provided me. Now I could write other business logic here if I wanted to do some other things, maybe change it before I return it, or do some validation before setting it, and that's what's available here. Now there's other ways I can write this. So for our enumeration, I can refer to my enumeration now. Remember, it's called donor type. And I can also create it like this, where I just do a get and set, and it really implies this. So I can write it both ways when I'm doing these accessors. Finally, we'll have a double, which is the donation amount. So here I've got three properties on my class called big donor, dtype, donation amount, and name. And the big donor, again, is going to be something we'll continue to work with a little bit and get a sense for that. So we'll quick save, see if the syntax is right. And of course it didn't like that I didn't close my set there, so we'll quick save. And everything's good. So I'll click save and close that. So now we've got two classes that we've just created. We've created our enumeration for donor type, and we've created a big donor. Finally, for this exercise, let's go ahead and create a class called donor manager. And this one's going to be actually executing some things against donor. So this one's called donor manager, and this is where we'll actually work with our big donor class. So we'll have a private variable that'll store how many donors that we're working with. And we'll have a property that gives us access to that internal private member variable. So I've got a private member variable, and I'm going to expose that out through this public accessor here. And let's say I want to define a threshold for what a big donor actually is. So we can use the final here. It's only going to be set once here. And we'll say that $500 will be equivalent to a big donor, so we can set that threshold. Finally, let's write an operation here. So this operation returns a big donor object. We'll call the method retrieve big donor, and we'll add the code that's going to create an instance of the big donor class. So we'll make an instance called D, and it's a new big donor. And so this is the equivalent of instantiating up a new big donor object. I can access the name property, maybe call it Richard. As you see, there's no IntelliSense if you're coming from environments that automatically do type ahead and show you what's coming next. So you kind of have to understand what your class object's properties are called. This is an individual donor. And so I'm going to create this donor object, this big donor object, and I'm going to return that object from this operation. We'll quick save and see if our syntax is right. And of course it doesn't like double quotes. I just force of habit there. So we'll put that in single quotes for strings. We'll click quick save. And of course it wants a value coming into the constructor because we chose it to give it name. So in reality, I'd like to do that and comment out this. And we'll quick save. And it likes it. Remember, we added a parameter to our constructor, so we can't just pass nothing in here. We'd either pass in null, which would also work, or in this case, just pass in the value we had set here. So we're going to test this by accessing the developer console, which we can click our name, click developer console, so we can write code, browse code, and so forth from this environment. So here we can see all our classes, our pages, there's our Visualforce page, here's our classes. If I click on Big Donor, I can even double click and see the class itself, which is great. In our case, I want to look at the Donor Manager class, and we'll set a breakpoint right here by clicking next to the line. You get the little red dot here indicating there's a breakpoint. I want to then execute some code. So I'm going to create Donor Manager DM equals new Donor Manager, and I'm going to make Big Donor D is the value that's returned from that. Then click Execute. And when it's done, if I jump to the Heap Dumps tab, this is actually paused here at the breakpoint. I can click on this particular heap dump, and then I can browse the tree. So I can say for this, it's looking at the context variables. So here's D, the variable we declared. It's got a donation amount of 300, which is what we had in our code. It's got the string value, and so forth. So it's got here, I can see my class that I got returned here. The Richard donor that's done $300 donation. So I can actually browse my code here and browse the execution, do a bit of breakpoints and debugging if something wasn't working right. So here from the developer console, I can prove that this ran okay. It created a donor manager, retrieved the big donor, and I got that back and could see that here by confirming that here's the object that came back from my class.